As we look at the past, I would hope we can get inspired by looking at the craftsmanship and looking at the details and long to build better because we see beautiful things like this. What is Georgian, right? What is this style? What is this style of architecture? What's going on with this? This, of course, it's named after King George. That's why it's called Georgian Style. It's very symmetrical. You're going to just see a bunch of Georgian pictures from different parts of the country, right? That was from Virginia. This is also in Williamsburg. These are commercial buildings. We'll talk a little bit about commercial construction, what that looked like. This is Independence Hall. That's the Carpenters Company. We'll talk about that. This is up in New England. You see that the Georgian style begins to change a little bit. Some chinoiserie there. This is in Philadelphia again. This is the stateroom at the Independence Hall. This is from the Mid-Atlantic. This is the Hampton Hall. Another commercial building in Rhode Island, right? These are all Georgian styles, full paneled walls, and so there are details and there are elements of the Georgian style that we kind of readily recognize. This is kind of maybe what we think of when we think of Georgian, right? It's just that if you Googled Georgian plans, right, something like this might come up. This is Westover, I believe. It's in Virginia. It's a really, really nice Georgian house. Now, the things that we're going to be studying today are super nice. Okay, in other words, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. We are really studying the top 5% of houses. One, those are the houses that stayed. Some of the early settler houses were literally, wood driven into the ground and, mud floors in a sod roof. And so those things didn't stay, right? Those things fell apart and they weren't expected to stay. They weren't expected to last. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to dig into this Georgian. We're going to talk about this house style. We're going to talk about how it was built. We're going to talk about builders. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on William Buckland. He's one of my heroes. He was a builder in Annapolis and in Virginia, a great builder. We're going to just talk about his story and how he started his company and what he did and how he worked. Talk about commercial versus residential. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time on masonry. And so what I want to do as we go through this kind of course, and we got another one coming in July and another one in August. The next one will be Federal Style, and then the next one will be Greek Revival. It'll be really fun to see how, it'll be fun for me, it'll be fun to see how these styles change. Now, this is kind of a quick overview of kind of where we are. This is American architectural history. Okay, we're right here, this Georgian style. Okay, we got Federal, Greek Revival, Civil War's here, got Victorian Arts and Crafts, Period Revival, World War II, and then the ranch and the early crap building after that. So the Revolutionary War is here, right? We become a country after that. Everything before 1780, 1775 is considered colonial, right? So when you hear the colonial style of architecture, it tends to mean Georgian, Federal, right? Even some Greek Revival will be colonial. But truly, colonial is really when we were colonies, right? When we were colonies of England and France and Spain, that was really what colonial architecture is. We're going to be studying Georgian in this period, okay? So, here's an overview of what the world looked like in 1760, right? Consider that America is over 100 years old, okay? Jamestown and then Williamsburg were 1625, 1632, right? Those are happening kind of in this area of the country. The population in 1760 is 1.5 million, right? You see it broken out over these different areas, and the research I was doing was basically that there's New England, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies. New England is basically everything north of New York, right? Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. The middle colonies are kind of New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and then the southern colonies start kind of Virginia, Maryland, and go south. And so you see the different populations, 447, 374, and 726 in the different colonies, right? need to realize that the 5 major cities in this time were, Boston, Newport, New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston, okay? Now, Philly was the biggest at 19,000, right? Newport was the smallest at 6,000. Those together, 60,000, right? So, less than 5% are living in cities. So most of the houses, and this is what I was saying earlier, most of the houses that we're studying are really city houses and some of these plantations and stuff, but those are the cream of the crop, right? And especially when you get into brick construction, which we'll talk about, that was the nicest houses and the nicest thing going on. At this time, Philadelphia is kind of the hot spot, the big town. It's the largest town. Charleston may be the richest town, okay, at this time. Some of the architecture and details that come out of Charleston are just overwhelming for the size of it. A lot of Charleston gets settled by people out of the Caribbean that come to Charleston and kind of in the New World. So a lot of different things going on. That's kind of where the cities are laid out. Just in the mid-Atlantic, okay, this is kind of a map, right, of this area. So we're going to kind of focus in this area. Just all the things that you think about with colonial America. Okay, so here's Baltimore up here. Annapolis is just below that. All of these cities, if you'll notice, are port cities. Okay, so America is it is, you hear about some of the religious freedoms and people, but this is about money. Okay, this is about making money, and these everything is going to be close to a river for transportation. Everything is going to be close to something. Even the plantations that we're talking about will be right on the river. They were work centers. They were areas where work happened. Here's Williamsburg, Jamestown down here, right? So all of these things would have been easily accessible by ship, so that they were trading and in tobacco and into different things they were doing. There are building styles are driven by local materials, right? You weren't getting Vermont slate in Charleston, right? You weren't getting, stone from Mexico, right? It was you were using what you had locally to do. So in the Mid-Atlantic area, right, they have tons of clay. Okay, so masonry ends up being much more important here than it does in New England, right? Where in New England they have just trees out so they have too many trees, and so they make everything out of the wood. So the architecture then begins to be interpreted in those materials. We're going to see the skill of the craftsman is really located around cities. You're not going to find people that are going to go out to a farm to try to start a business. Think about being a trim carpenter and, where do you go for the work? Well, you're going to go where people are. So you're going to be in the cities. There are regional differences. If you study furniture, you know that the Boston highboy and the Philadelphia highboy and the Newport highboy are all different. The ball and claw feet are different. Same kind of differences that you'll see with here, where you'll see regional skill differences, the way they use trim differently, and so there are regional differences that happen. And then the crazy thing about this period is everything is handmade. And so if you think about that, and glass was hand blown, right? Bricks were, we'll talk about the bricks and how they were made. The hardware, we get some of this hardware made by a blacksmith in Philadelphia or outside of Philadelphia, and making these things by hand, and then of course doing the brass ones, right? That all of these things and all of these fixtures would be forged out of raw materials, would have been hammered, smoothed, sawn, and completely done by hand. The fact that you can make this kind of beautiful element completely by hand kind of blows me away in an era where, everything's made by the machine. So nails were made by hand. The story is that buildings were literally burned down so they could get the nails, right? Because nails were so valuable. They talk about home industries where people will actually have be making nails in the winter so that they can, use them. Shingles, the fact that shingles in Virginia and things like that, they couldn't afford copper, or they didn't have the metal for the valleys and things like that. So all of those valleys and all those things were made by hand, and then hand shaped so that the valley of a house would be done differently. So everything's made by hand. It's kind of a crazy era.